Ever since missionaries came to the Hawaiian Islands from the U.S. in the 1800s, they have tried to make Hawaii a part of the United States.
Problems arose in Hawaii when it suffered an economic crisis, and an outbreak for political power began in 1891. Queen Liliuokalani's power was challenged when she was overthrown by insurgents. On August 12, 1898, Hawaii was impacted when it was under annexation to the U.S., but its flag remained strong and proud.
On January 16, 1893, U.S. diplomat John Stevens ordered troops off the USS Boston to help with the pre-planned overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy.
After the troops landed, protests were made against John Stevens by Samuel Parker, the Hawaiian Minister of Foreign Affairs.
The Hawaiian Constitution specifically says that the monarch belongs to executive power. So the Queen was not an absolute monarch. The Queen was no different than the President. Her job was to enforce the law, and she had a police force to enforce it. So if people committed a crime, they would have to be arrested. Well, these individuals would not be arrested because the Marines were protecting them. So if the police force went into arrest, we would have a shootout.
Parker said that landing without permission of the Hawaiian government was against international law. John Stevens ignored this, which made the Hawaiian government investigate and closely monitor his actions.
The following day, Hawaiian police were unable to arrest around 30 men for treason without colliding with the U.S. troops that came from the USS Boston the previous day, because John Stevens declared the U.S. would protect the insurgents. Queen Liliuokalani was forced to temporarily assign her executive power to President Grover Cleveland under protest and calls for investigation of John Stevens and the U.S. troops.
It was Queen Liliuokalani's duty to execute Hawaiian law, but because the U.S. troops were there, she was unable to arrest the men.
Now, what the Queen then was forced to do on January 17th was, in order to avoid bloodshed, she temporarily assigned her executive power the authority to enforce law in Hawaii.
On February 14, 1893, President Harrison signed a treaty of annexations with the insurgents led by Lorne Thurston. President Harrison submitted the treaty to the U.S. Senate for a ratification and tells the Senate the U.S. troops were not involved.
On February 1893, the Queen had Paul Newman to be her attorney and traveled to Washington, D.C. to represent her in front of the U.S. government.
Because the United States was not able to get Hawaii by a treaty, the first attempt was in 1893, but the United States Senate couldn't ratify it because President Cleveland removed that treaty from the Senate in order to do the investigation. He never resubmitted it.
The following month, Grover Cleveland was elected president, and Newman delivered the protest to Cleveland. After observing the protests and the assignment of power, President Cleveland withdraws the Treaty of Annexation from the Senate. Cleveland then appointed James Blount, former chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, as special commissioner to investigate the circumstances of the overthrow.
On April 1, 1893, Special Commissioner James Blount arrived in Honolulu and began the presidential investigation. On October 18, 1893, the investigation was completed, and Secretary of State Walter Gresham apprised the President. International law was violated by the U.S. ambassador and the U.S. troops. Members of the provisional government committed the crime of treason, which was punishable by death. The United States must restore the Hawaiian Kingdom and the government to the status before the arrival of the U.S. troops on January 16, 1893. Willis stated that the President concluded that the members of the government and their supporters have been led to their present situation of revolt against the government. The Queen was then asked, should she be restored to the throne, would you grant full amnesty as to life and property to all those who have been or who are now in the provisional government, or who have been instrumental in the overthrow of your government? The Queen denied amnesty. However, after 4 meetings with Willis, the Queen agreed to grant amnesty to the insurgents after the government was restored. A declaration was signed by the Queen on December 18, 1893, which was dispatched to the U.S. State Department of Washington, D.C. The illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian government was now settled. On December 19, 1893, Willis met with the insurgents, led by Sanford Dole, and told them of the President's plan to restore the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the Queen would thereafter grant them amnesty. There are 2 agreements that were entered into the President and the Queen, both being the 2 chief executives of both countries of government. Under U.S. constitutional law, these 2 agreements are called executive agreements, and under international law, they are called international compacts that have the force of a treaty. The Cleveland-Liliuokalani Assignment binds the U.S. President and his successors to administer Hawaiian Kingdom law. The Restoration Agreement binds the U.S. President and his successors to restore the Hawaiian Kingdom government and the monarchy to grant a pardon. Years after, the Hawaiian Islands became a territory and eventually became a state of the USA. Many years later, in the 1990s, President Bill Clinton signed an apology for the role of the U.S. government in the overthrow. During her time in jail, Queen Liliuokalani composed a beautiful poem called The Queen's Prayer. This was a legendary poem that still lives on today. Please listen.